Ukrainian President Zelensky is all set to embark on his third visit to Washington since the war in Ukraine began in 2022. Now, he last visited US in September. Aid for Ukraine, that is the hot topic, of course, for Zelensky. In its effort to ward off Russia, it will be a prime agenda here. But will Zelensky be able to navigate his way around the divisions in the US leaders, within the US leaders, on continuing the aid for Ukraine? Now, that is what we are going to be discussing here in this live discussion. For more on this, we are now joined by Mr. Diesen. Mr. Diesen is a professor of international relations at the University of South-Eastern Norway. Welcome to WION, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Diesen, let's start off, exactly what Zelensky hopes for. Of course, we know he's going there to ask for aid. Is Zelensky's visit to the White House perhaps a last lobbying effort to gain funds for Ukraine?
Well, of course, this is when they need money, Zelensky usually travels across the West. So this is an effort to rally support, especially in terms of money and weapons. But as I've seen, this arrival will be quite different from in the past. The first time he arrived, he was treated as a rock star, a new Churchill, giving standing ovation by everyone. Now the mood is very different in the United States.
Just bring out the contrast between how, of course, we remember the way he was received the earlier times when he visited, and now within a matter of a few months, how things have changed. September is when he visited last, and now it's, we're in December, but there is a complete change in thought process here. This time when he comes, what should he be expecting?
Well, I think it's going to meet much more opposition because in the United States there's so much division in terms of whether or not this is a war worth pursuing. Also, the impressions of Ukraine have changed a lot as well, because keep in mind that whenever the United States go to war, there's always great enthusiasm in the beginning, bipartisan support. Everything is a conflict between good versus evil, and it will be an easy victory. But then, of course, as always, we see it doesn't go according to expectations. It wasn't that simple. Many people are very worried about authoritarianism in Ukraine. Others are worried that this could spiral into a nuclear war with Russia. And also, some are just simply worried about the economic situation in the U.S. They see their weapon storages being depleted. They want to devote their military interest to other places. They're going through this, not just an economic problem, but they're also having a monetary crisis with a huge inflation. So across the board, they have a lot of other problems. They have other wars as well, I would add. Some simply want to focus more attention towards the war they have in the Middle East, which could become a regional war. Other wants to focus on a possible future war with China. So there's a lot of different reasons for these divisions. But at the moment, of course, people are the main rhetoric seeming to prevail now is, why isn't the United States looking after its own borders instead of Ukrainian borders? So there's this rhetoric. You didn't have it the previous time he was there. So this is quite different.
Mr. Diesen, now last week Republicans blocked $110.5 billion emergency spending bill that included funding for Ukraine's war effort. Now, lawmakers have also mentioned that Mr. Biden and Mr. Zelensky have not provided a clear plan for winning the war. Now, is the plan only to see who lasts longer in the battlefield when it comes to Russia and when it comes to Ukraine? Who can keep standing till the end? Is it just a question about that now to determine who wins from here?
Well, it has to be. Initially, when Russia invaded, within the first week of the invasion, the Ukrainians and Russians decided to sit down and discuss neutrality for Ukraine to just get a quick end to it. But then, of course, as we all know, the US and the UK intervened and convinced Ukrainians, if you just continue fighting, don't take any peace agreement, we'll send you all the weapons you need. Well, it seems that, they said we'll be with you to the end, but it seems like we now have reached that end. So once that happened, it did become a war of attrition in which both sides exhaust each other. Because now that they're in this war, Ukraine has real problems. They could cease to exist as a country. So it's an existential problem. But it's also the same for the Russians. They see this as an existential threat. If Ukraine would have prevailed, NATO would have moved in, possibly taken over Crimea. This is, as if Russia and China would enter Mexico. This would be completely unacceptable, an existential threat. So they're both going to fight till the end, which means in a war of attrition, you exhaust the enemy. And this is the goal. And I think now that we see that this war has pretty much been won already. There's no way Ukraine can win, not on the border of Russia. So I think that this is how it's going to end. One side, which looks like it's going to be Ukraine now, is going to be exhausted, and then it's going to be a victory for Russia, which is also very destabilizing for Europe, of course, because any conflict that ends in one side completely winning, the other one completely losing, tends to create a very destabilizing peace, if you will.
Now, I just want to go slightly off of what we started off from here. If you just look at how Russia has progressed here, Mr. Diesen, just taking back from what I heard from you, there was a statement recently which came from Vladimir Putin himself, and it indicated that he wanted to mend ties with Europe. He really doesn't have any issue with Europe at large. Also, and we've also seen the kind of welcome he got from the UAE, and he visited Saudi Arabia as well. And the kind of bonhomie he shared with Mohammed bin Salman, the kind of handshakes they were having, the body language, you rarely see Putin smiling so, so vividly. And, he was so much at ease, it seemed like that from the body language. Talk to us about, how Russia's global imprint has increased since 2022, ever since the invasion or ever since the war, whichever way one like to see it, whether it's Africa, whether it's the West Asian region, whether it's tying up with different European nations.
Well, this is what the huge context of this war, because keep in mind that for the past 300 years, Russia has attempted to modernize by integrating with Europe all the way back to Peter the Great. But also since the days of Gorbachev, they dreamed about this greater Europe, they called it. However, in 2014, when Western governments toppled the government in Ukraine to install an anti-Russian regime, since then, what happened in Russia was, a huge tectonic shift. They abandoned this thing they called Greater Europe, and they said, let's instead go for Greater Eurasia. Why are we trying to always for hundreds of years be part of Europe which doesn't want us? So they started to look more towards the east. So they want instead now to have economic partnership with India, with China, the Middle East, Central Asia, Iran. Like, this is the main initiative they have. So when we're putting all these sanctions on Russia, they're not simply trying to get by until relations are getting better. They're using this as a way to intensify this shift from economic connectivity to the West to the East. And that's what you're seeing now, this technological partnership, industries, transportation corridors, trading in their own currencies, banking, different financial arrangements. This is the main objective for Russia. So this is a huge shift now, and that's why, of course, this goes down quite well with the Arabs as well from Saudi Arabia, because they also want to diversify their ties to avoid excessive dependence on the U.S. So yeah, I saw the footage as well, which seems a bit like high school buddies meeting again.
Exactly, like you said, like high school buddies, they're meeting like old friends meeting, and it just seemed to have like a lot of history behind that handshake, and they just seem to be very comfortable meeting each other. And I think the whole world saw what everyone, it was easy to notice, how happy they were sort of tying up with each other. And it very well made it clear what that means for, at least for the US, if not anyone else. I also wanted to come to you, Mr. Diesen, on this. Now, allies of Hungary's far-right Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, will hold a closed-door meeting with Republicans in Washington, and they're going to push for an end to US military support for Ukraine. Now, Hungary is not the only one within the NATO nations. There is Slovakia, there's Poland, there's Bulgaria. There are several European nations which have not been too keen on Ukrainian support, and for different reasons, of course. But what are the chances that Ukraine gains funds from the West now that NATO nations, or some of them at least, are also not at all in favor of it?
Well, Ukraine's still gonna get money and weapons, but we're reaching the end of the line. We see that the support is dropping off. So of course Hungary is very much critical of this. Slovakia just put in a new government. Netherlands, even Poland, the biggest supporter of Ukraine, is now they're having their own conflicts along the border, economic that is. So the interest is dropping off quite rapidly. So it's still going to be weapons coming in, but the main problem is this is huge, very, very damaging for Europe, this war, and the sanctions are quite damaging. So a lot of people see that the political class not really acting in their interest. So one by one, a lot of these governments will be voted out. I mean, the main, for example, the German government is becoming very, very unpopular as well. So at some point, they're going to be replaced as well. So I see a war fatigue hitting Europe. Again, the economic sanctions, they're hurting us more than the Russians. We're losing on the battlefield. The political interest in this. Also, when we began this war, the narrative we were sold wasn't really correct, that this was simply an unprovoked invasion. I think that NATO countries, or Europe at least, is starting to get more the view of the rest of the world. Because the rest of the world, they didn't support the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but they also didn't want to support a proxy war against Russia. And what I see at least is more public opinion going in this direction.
There's definitely been a shift in opinion from leaders, from nations, and also from the public regarding what has happened in Ukraine. And of course, we'll know within a day or two of what comes out from Zelensky's third visit to Washington. Thank you so much for joining in, Mr. Diesen. That was Mr. Glenn Diesen joining us from Norway. Pleasure to hear from you, and also, exchanging notes on those meetings between Putin and MBS. Thank you so much for joining in.
My pleasure.